Okay, so here's my brief video on tough guys. So this is a field of masculine studies which has really caught on in the last little while. Um, there's a video that could be a kind of a call up, follow up to this, I guess complement to this, called Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger. I think. It's on CBC Gym, so it's free. If you go there and create a free account, you can access that. It's only about 40 minutes long and doesn't do quite the same job that Katz does of historicizing it, but it kind of gets to some of the more wacky aspects of masculine studies. Caulfield's biggest issue is to try to combat misinformation. So he wrote a book about Gwyneth Paltrow. I don't know if you know about her Project Goop, I think it's called, thing that she had going there, which is a bunch of nonsense. They've been sued a number of times over that. Anyways, so Katz is talking about the main focus, I think, or one of the focuses that's in this film, is the gendering or degendering of violence and how that works, and basically challenging the idea, the easy assumption, I suppose, that it's testosterone. Or that it's biological, that men are just basically designed or programmed to be more violent than anything else. Even though the numbers that he posts there at the very beginning of how many various crimes are committed by men is vastly overwhelming, vastly disproportionate to women. And he says, well, wait, some of the opposition is looking at this and it's just blaming testosterone. And notice some of the sources there. So one of the things that it's important to think about when you're assessing value is what sources are they using in support and what are they using in opposition. And I think he goes to Dr. Phil, who is, he's a Hollywood doctor, or he's a TV doctor, right? So it's not as though the entertainment comes first, I think, there. And then also Fox News, and I have my own opinions about whether Fox News is valuable or not, but you can come to your own conclusions in that way. So one thing that he says at the very beginning is the idea of the gendering or degendering of violence and how that works, right? So basically when something happens, what he's saying is this disguises systems of power. So when men are the violent actors, they become the shooter, the gunman, the assailant, right? Which has no gender to it. Whereas when women are violent, that is, they become the story, right? So that implies two things. One, it hides what he says, some kind of culpability of major elements of power, but it also normalizes the idea that this is the way violence happens. It doesn't happen for women. It's a kind of a shocking thing if it does, and when men do it, it's just kind of a normal, or it's assumed to be that way. But it also hides, again, part of what he's saying, I think, in the way that we just turn this into a biological certainty, is that it hides dominant structures of power. And that mostly is men. And that's kind of a curious notion, and I'll get to that in a bit. So when he's looking at what he calls the cool pose. So mostly what he's looking at is the way that systems other than biology contribute to what violence is. And this is all kinds of cultural things. Whether he implicates NRA or the gun lobby and the gun industry, I suppose, video games, movies and television, family, social organizations, all of those things in some way package a particular kind of masculinity that he says contributes to the violence, but also a kind of an alienation of people from that, right? And that's, again, back to the Caulfield thing. A lot of what he's looking at are extreme reactions to people who don't feel like they fit in to traditional notions of what masculinity is. And he's talking about that here. So when he implicates one thing he says about the gun lobby and the video game lobby is each of them kind of blame each other without acknowledging that they're in bed with each other. That basically the violent the weapons that are used in various video games are actual ones that are being produced by the gun lobby. So Hollywood does the same thing. So both of these are complicit, even though they're pointing the finger at one another. So the cool pose for cats is this positioning of masculinity, or people pretending to act or to pose as something. It's a performance to perform what masculinity is, and a lot of it again has no center. And we can see this in relation to whatever order you read these in. Machine Readable Me, she says the same thing. This notion of authentic individual just doesn't really exist. And that's, I think, what Katz is saying similarly here. This notion of an authentic masculinity just doesn't work. And the pose is the presentation of a cultural construction of what masculinity is. So if you go back, he lists a number of crises that happen, and a lot of literary and cultural productions emerge from these crises. And the first one is the closing of the frontier. So you get this idea that there's this authentic masculinity. Well, what's that? You go out and you conquer nature. You hack your life out of the wild, and you tame it. Right? That's what men do. Right? And then there's the first crisis of that is the industrialization movement, where people stop doing that, partly because industrialization happens, but also there becomes less and less outdoors to conquer. And people move from, hewers of water, drawers of water and hewers of wood. That's it. To working in a factory. So I'm putting doors on cars or whatever it is. And the cultural production that emerges from that, he says, are these male adventure magazines where you have these Tarzan characters. That's a bad one, but all of these pop culture productions of people performing this masculinity that they think of has gone away. Then there's another crisis when people move from the factory floor onto blue collar or white collar jobs. So now I'm not even pounding nails or doing something with my hands. I'm pushing paper around. And so again, that's another crisis of masculinity that there's a cultural response to. So the cool pose, well, what's that? It's acting, pretending or acting how they perceive a man to be, and that's a very traditional, conservative, I guess, and that's a bad word for it too. Misrepresentation of what masculinity is, which I think Katz would also say is somewhat fluid. So he starts off with the response to the moving into the office space with hypermasculine movies. And then there's a picture, I think, of Arnold Schwarzenegger and also of Rambo, Sylvester Stallone. Those two characters, right? And then the best one where the pose is the pose of a pose is the movie Scarface, the Al Pacino film. And so the strange thing about that is there are multiple poses happening there, because Pacino's Italian and he's playing a Cuban. So we already have that weird kind of switcheroo of what masculinity is. And he's one of these people who's a hyper-violent, he's a gangster, basically. And then he shifts to all of these different people who love that masculinity, who love that film. And he talks about inner city black men, right? That they're performing this tough guy, this gangster who is himself performing a role. He says, well, why do they perform that? Well, the Cuban person is a displaced person, and so he's performing strength in a way that is visceral and fairly basic. And that's what the inner city black people are. So people that are disenfranchised, that feel like they have not been given access to power in the way other people have, that creates this response. And that is for them to act like gangsters, right? Some of them might be. But that's his argument, that they're performing this gangster that they see on television and movies because they don't have access to real power in the way that other people might. Well, then you get the third and final one, which is, I think it's a Seth Green, and then there's a bit from Gran Turismo where the white guy is speaking, as what I guess Katz would call sort of inner city black speak, right? And there's another movie that I don't remember I can't remember what it's called, And in both cases, look, you're white. Why are you talking like that? And so here, what's the crisis of masculinity there? Well, if you are a privileged white person in the suburbs, right? You want to be hard. You have to, you're trying to prove yourself to your classmates, to your peers, or whatever, that you're not some cream puff. Well, then you perform this performance of a performance, right? You're performing the inner city alienated black person, and now you're acting out again. So all these things connect to the hyper violence that we get from the number of various shootings that he talks about, which is pretty much, I mean, it's a curious thing that he doesn't really talk very much about how this is an epidemic almost exclusively in the United States. These mass shootings that happen routinely in the United States just don't happen in Sweden or in Canada even, for that matter. But he says these are all a product of boys being alienated from what they understand to be masculinity. So, and they're blaming their classmates. They're bullied. They don't have a sense of that they can participate in the way other boys are in what is masculine. Sometimes there's a hyper misogyny to this as well, and that's what eventually pushes these boys. That's his thesis, into this hyper violent mode where they feel like they're at the end of their rope, and so they act out in these really catastrophic masculine ways. So a couple of the other terms that he talks about is something like backlash masculinity and restorative violence. And that's kind of what relates to the mass shooters. But it's not just that. It's anybody who's acting out violently towards women who feels like they've lost a sense of power and control, right? So you see women coming into the workplace that previously weren't there, or trans people or whatever it might be. That seems to be the threat to the run-of-the-mill masculinity, and saying that, well, the reason that I'm not successful is because women have taken it from me, which again is a feeling of persecution that's actually a lack of entitlement. You lose entitlement, it's something that you feel that you should just get, and that is felt as persecution. And so, yeah, the restorative violence is where men act violently towards women in order to show that they're men, right? To say, this is the way that I can demonstrate that I am somehow a man once again. Okay, that's my story.